Okay, let me see if I can share this. Ooh, I got it. Okay. Share Finder. Okay, I'm gonna pull this up and make it. Now let me know if you can see this all right.
We can see it thus far.
Okay, I want to do it as the full screen. Nope, that's not the way to do it. I want to view it. You know, every time they
hit preview.
Yeah, every time they, what am I missing here? Every time the computer's updated, it's different than the last time I used it.
It's the true for Adobe as well. Is that preview at the shift?
Yeah, I just have them selected in Finder, but I could do it in.
I think what you have to do is select, share your whole desktop.
Okay.
So in the beginning, it asks you, there's several screens. There you go.
Okay, here we go. So here, okay, so I'm just gonna pull up a few pictures and give you a little bit of context about them, but then I'm also gonna read some things to fuck you up. And then I wanna talk about a few other things that come up in relation to the prompt that Javi sent me, Professor Javi. And feel free at any point to interject with questions or comments or interrogations or critiques, or tell me that I'm a fool. Any of it's okay, because I'm on the other side of a computer, so it's not really gonna hurt. One of the ways that I wanna start out is I wanna read you a quick poem by a photographer, or by a poet named Franz Wright. This has nothing to do with this picture. Okay. Dream of snow, Los Angeles. Toward the end of November, I dreamed that it snowed here. I dreamed that I rose from the couch where I'd been napping for weeks with the lights on, and I went to the window. As a child in Minneapolis, I was warned at school not to eat the snow. As a child, I was drilled to get my ass up and my head down under the desk where it'd be safe when the glass shattered. It says in the newspaper, airports are snowbound all over the country. A girl in Nebraska is found in a field frozen to death in her nightgown. It'll be 80 degrees. And I will close my eyes now and lean back in this chair and watch the snow blowing in from the north, over the freeways, over the emptied suburbs, over the gray waves, over the graves of the skyline, over the university, over the Mercedes-filled parking lots of the pale physicists, and far from you. Franz Wright. So my point being, in that series of images, there's a suggestion of any number of things, true or false, and beautiful, but also disturbing. And I think that that's true of almost every experience as you go through life, that depending on how open to experience you are, you can find within something beautiful glory, and you can also find the horrors of history, and you can also find total banality. And it's all there simultaneously, and it kind of depends on how you look at it, what your perspective is, and how you decide to interrogate what's in front of you. And I think one of the hardest things in being a photographer and going through life is keeping all of that straight about what it is that you feel in relation to what you're supposed to feel in terms of some kind of sense of things that's outside of yourself, and versus what you actually feel in that moment and what you can create in an image. And an image is just a way of preserving a feeling of the moment for the future, right? And the thing is that everything you see will never be the same again. And so anytime that you see something that inspires you or that gives you a moment of pause, at least you should give it that moment of appreciation and in the moment interpretation of it for yourself, and be present, basically. Now, if it has a real strong feeling, you might want to figure out how to make a picture of it so you can bring it with you into the future, because otherwise you're leaving it in the past. And otherwise, you'll never see it exactly the same again. And you may have every intention of going back and making a picture again. You may say, oh, today, you know, this, the light on this structure and this person walking in front of it is so beautiful, but oh, I don't really feel like making the picture. I'll get it tomorrow. Well, you drive back tomorrow and it's a cloudy day. There's no light on the structure and nobody's out because it's not a nice day. And the thing that you saw that moved your heart is gone. And that's everything always, forever. And so you have to act in the moment and make the most of it, and see if you can feel within the flow what's actually going on for you. And then the real trick is transposing that into a picture if you possibly can. And let alone into a picture that gives you and gives a future audience a sense of what it was like to be there, and what it was like to smell it, what it was to dance through it, what it was to hear it. But to do that in a silent thing, presented in probably 2 dimensions, out of context in the future. And that's the thing, like in a film, you have a captive audience for say an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, and you get to create an entire world and drag the viewer through it. And that's whether or not the film is effective. However, with a photograph, you have basically 1 picture, or maybe if you have a series of pictures, maybe 20, in order to tell the same kind of story as a film. And if you can really get it down and get it groovy, you got to tell that whole story of the film in 1 picture. And by that, I mean, you got to see if you can kind of refine all of the pieces that are coming together in real time around you, and interpret them within the flow of everything, and get real lucky with a whole bunch of chance and luck of the draw, and put elements into a puzzle together in a way that makes sense and can be decoded in the future. And that's really what I think pictures are, basically, is puzzles. However, and now I'm going to read you something from the Tao. The Tao Te Ching is a beautiful ancient text, and kind of teaches you to be a little bit less materialistic, a little bit more present, a little bit more real. And so on the first page, one of the first things it says is, free from desire, you realize the mystery. Caught in desire, you see only the manifestations. And I think that that's something useful to keep in mind. This book is a beauty. The translation I'm reading is by Stephen Mitchell. I don't know if you can see me or just the screen right now.
We can see you on the side. Yeah.
Okay, the Tao Te Ching, the Stephen Mitchell translation is beautiful. But so at first, I read this because I was absolutely insane and depressed and out of my mind. I'd gone a little bit crazy. And this book helped me in some ways put things back in order for myself and begin to establish for myself a way of being able to survive all the turmoil, chaos, and tumult that surrounds us all the time if you pay attention. And it also, I think, has helped me as a photographer because it is full of things that we know to be true, as in wisdom, but it's sometimes useful to be able to sit down and read in one place a whole bunch of wisdom that helps you reset and get back to where you're kind of stable within yourself. And so throughout this book, there's all kinds of useful stuff, but when I read this next little quote, it really stuck with me in terms of being related to photography and being related to being within the flow in a scene. And it says, can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? And the reason that I think that that relates to photography is that to a certain degree, if you're in a scene and you're trying to photograph and you're just hungry for the picture and you're going at it, you're going at it, you're going at it, you're going at it, click, 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 and you're not even really tuned into what you're photographing, you're just trying to get the picture of it, you're probably missing the whole thing. However, if you can step back a little bit and take a breath and observe for yourself what's going on, and observe for yourself what people are doing and how they're moving through a scene, or how the sun changes over a scene, or whatever kind of time space you're working in, if you can step back and breathe and observe it and feel it, you might well be able to make a picture that feels much more like the scene than if you're going at it like a barking dog. And so, so can you remain unmoving until the right thing happens all by itself? And that's also what I mean by embracing chance. So in this first picture, I was in the middle of, say, 40 teenagers, all in cowboy gear, getting ready to go ride cows and bulls and so forth at an event in Texas that I was covering for the New Yorker. And I put myself into the middle of this scene, and I wanted to show how it felt to be in the middle of it. I wanted to show the nervous energy. I wanted to make a picture that felt how it feels to be here. And so I put myself in the middle of it. And I remember, basically all I really remember was that I saw all these hats kind of lining up on the right side of this frame. And I thought to myself, what a peculiar formation of hats, how fascinating. And I clicked the shutter. But at the same time, as those hats were lining up, there was also a nervous boy right in the center who I think allows you into his psychological space because of the nature of the way he's engaged in the moment, the way the light goes across his face, the way there's kind of a formal aspect that leads you into the frame and toward him, but also allows you and your eye to travel throughout the frame. And so it ends up being an effective picture for all of those different things coming together. But it's that because I allowed it to happen in front of me. I don't know how else to explain that. This is a very different kind of picture where somebody's kind of performing for me. You know what I mean? In a certain way. And are these coming through okay?
Yes, John.
Cool. So I'm just going to show you these quickly to give you a sense of some different pictures that I've made. Here's the author, Joy Williams. This literally happened in front of me just because I was paying attention. And I was on a boat in the right time, in the right place at the right time. And I was ready. But you couldn't make that up. I don't think that you could even come up with this as an idea for a fashion shoot and then make it happen in the same way and have it feel as real. And that's part of the thing, is like being within the flow of how everything goes and accepting it as it comes to you, as opposed to imposing on it. So these are from, a fairly wide but also fairly limited selection of things I've seen and places I've gone and people I've photographed and events and so forth. But I think that there's a certain continuity in terms of my approach within these pictures and the kind of moments that I'm interested in. And let's see, let me pull up. I was interested in thinking about the society of spectacle in relation to what's been going on recently in this country. And so I wanted to start by, I wanted to show you a few pictures from the campaign a few years ago. And I wanted to stop and linger on this picture for a moment, which I took in February of 2016, before Trump was even the nominee. And I wanted to stop here because, well, first, I don't want to claim to be any kind of expert on Gita board. And I'm not an expert on anything other than my own pictures and my own experience. However, when I had a chance to reread Society of the Spectacle, and I was previously familiar with the film of the same name, and how the broader concepts of it fit into kind of art history and mid-century history, it was interesting to think about how Debord and his situationist movement were essentially suggesting that to possess subjectivity of experience is inherently mediated and dependent on a set of experiences of post-war capitalism and cultural hegemony dominated by us capitalists and our production and advertising and mass media and the culture exported to the rest of the world. And that was 60 years ago, right? And while some of that book is basically a rehashing of Marxism in Russia and so forth, there are moments in it, and this is what I really pulled out and emailed to Javi to email you, that I think can really enlighten us on what's going on in our moment now. And everything that I'm reading these days keeps bringing me back to that same feeling. Like I couldn't help but read Society of the Spectacle and find elements within it that were very relevant to what's going on. For instance, I loved, let me see if I can pull it up. I loved one of these quotes, I think it was number 9. Yeah, in a world that is really upside down, the true is a moment of the false. That's such a beautiful and strange idea. That the true is a moment of the false. And that kind of beautifully ties into a lot of photography, I think, in terms of like, the truth is the moment of the image, but the image is pulled out of a whole bunch of, is pulled out of the flow, right? It's an instantaneous, subjective kind of edit of flowing, ongoing time that may be true in the way, may be true in that it makes you feel something and tells you a story. And that story may be true for you, but it may not be the truth of that moment. It may not be the truth of the whole flow of everything. It may not be true whatsoever in another understanding of what truth is. But at the same time, if it reveals something to you, and if it makes you think, and if it opens up and expands your consciousness or expands your level of empathy or your ability to engage with something or question something, then that's what's to say that that's not equally true, right? In your experience of dealing with surviving the world. And so I've been thinking a lot about this and how essentially I think there's let me see if I can get back here. I think that there's essentially been like a flow towards spectacle ever since this book was written. And I think that that's one of the most consistent things actually is the flow toward everything being spectacle. And the ultimate version of that is having our reality TV president. But it's also resulted in kind of, I think, a whole bunch of splits within culture and divisions within culture, such that like there's a fascination with the spectacle of violence within culture, and I think that comes up over and over and over again, whether on TV or in a school shooting or whatever. I mean, school shootings are essentially like the ultimate spectacle of violence for your peers, right? And now that spectacle of violence that's fascinated us since the beginning of the founding of this country has found like a particularly vile cruelty and a kind of perverse popularity in the current administration's non-handling of all these simultaneous miseries. And so the president's supporters, let me get to what I want to pull up here. The president's supporters envision Trump as Rambo with a rocket launcher, as somehow a hero, whereas like that's the ultimate. This is like the ultimate vision of the Second Amendment running amok. Is Rambo with an RPG and helicopter gunship, taking over our country, when in fact, if we're theoretically free, we don't need that whatsoever. But instead, we've chosen to engage with a dance with free doom. And so this, somehow, the image of a Rambo president is like, is somehow supposed to be reassuring, when in fact, right? Like when in fact, it's a completely opposite approach that's fulfilled in fantasy versus, say, this sign, which I found. So I recently did an assignment driving around northeastern Pennsylvania for the Times, trying to get a sense of the electorate. And it was really pretty striking. There are a lot, and part of what the story was about how there are a lot more Trump-Pence signs and support in rural parts of the country than Biden. And that essentially, if rural areas don't get out the Democratic vote as much as possible, the margins of Republican votes will just swamp whatever cities contribute in terms of vote tallies. And so Pennsylvania, for instance, won't be held together by Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And so I was assigned to go out and photograph like 4 different people involved in the Democratic Party in rural Pennsylvania. But in the interim, I also found kind of signs of the moment, Trump 2020 and beyond. For instance, here's a guy delivering Biden signs around the country or around the state. But I think, and here's the head of the Democratic Party in one of the rural counties, Susquehanna County in Pennsylvania, another chair of a Democratic Party in Towanda, Pennsylvania. But like what a difference, say, between this and that, in terms of one is this is literally spectacle. It's literally like attention grabbing, kind of bizarro, like violence and kind of a disturbing approach to understanding the current moment, versus almost kind of innocent, almost kind of backward, almost kind of like hopelessly optimistic approach. And when these two things are dancing together, I don't know how any good is supposed to come of any good is supposed to come of any good is supposed to come of like such a mismatch between like an embrace of cruelty and an embrace of kindness, basically. And I think one of the things that originally got me interested in that was doing some work driving around Pennsylvania a couple months ago, right before I kind of did this work thinking that July 4th was coming up, and amidst the pandemic, it was hard to get out and photograph people, which is usually what I'm most interested in, is photographing people and crowds and seeing what's going on and seeing what it feels like to be surrounded by people. And instead, I was trying to listen to Dr. Fauci and keep things safe and avoid people. But I couldn't help but notice the ornamentation that people were putting on their lawns and buildings and property around the part of Pennsylvania where I've been living. And so I went out and made pictures of all these places and things wrapped in the flag. And one of the things I think is amazing here that may have been lost was, I believe that that's the Puerto Rican flag on this mannequin on his shirt, but it looks right. And so it's perfect for a July 4th of July Independence mannequin, setup. And this is just like one of the perfect kind of like just what the fuck is going on these days kind of moments for me. And I think that's what I really mean by paying attention, is like everywhere that you look, things are not what they seem. They are exactly as you know them to be. Things are very banal in many, many ways. But actually, if you look a little bit deeper and with any kind of criticality, you have to begin wondering what kind of future is suggested by the environment around us, right? Here and in this country, we seem to glorify violence and the military in the name of freedom and independence. And yet the people fighting for us at this point are essentially drawn from a poverty draft and are essentially the proletariat in the military. And so I think that's a very, very interesting moment within the history of this country that we're in now, where like the people in power are completely divorced from the people who actually make up the military. And yet the fantasy of this country is built on a fantasy of military power and influence around the world. And that's only been eroded by the people in power. So there's like a beautiful like sloshing of waves in every direction all the time, depending on how you kind of choose to look at it or are open to it. And like at any given time, the flag can come to mean any number of different things depending on how it's used. Now, in many ways, it's actually a very, very beautiful symbol in terms of its construction, its geometry, its form, and so forth. But then when you wrap things in it, it completely, I just love this impossible combination of things. When you wrap something in the flag, it just completely changes the meaning of the flag. It completely changes the meaning of the thing that's wrapped in it. And it completely changes like depending on who did the wrapping and what it's supposed to mean. And so I was going around looking at this and thinking about this, and honestly feeling pretty nutty about everything, because I'm real torn as an American and real torn as a thinking person about what any of it means, what any of it suggests, and where we might be headed. And I used to think that was like an impossible kind of absurdity. I was really interested in this idea of nostalgia without memory. Years ago, 10 years ago, I was really fascinated and obsessed with this idea of nostalgia without memory. And then there's like no greater like essential nostalgia without memory than the slogan "Make America Great Again." Like when was America really great, and for whom? And under what circumstances, and who was getting rich on the backs of whom at that time? It's ridiculous. Like, just what the fuck? Who thought that this was a good idea? Like, what a picture of America. The RV, a pig in a hat, the American flag, stars, a little porch. It's the American dream right here in one picture. And here's another version of it. Yeah, so I think that doing this work, basically made it possible for me to go out and do this most recent work, or maybe because they saw that work, they called me to go out and see what northeastern Pennsylvania looked like. And obviously these are different approaches and different takes, but like, what the fuck does this mean? I'm just like constantly baffled by various decisions that people make in public, and what things might mean, and where it suggests we might be going, and why. And I really can't tell you. But what I can tell you is that within a picture, there are any number of symbols, there are any number of ways of dividing up space, there are any number of ways of using light. And when you use light in particular ways, it tells you how to feel. And the reason that light tells you how to feel is that throughout your entire experience of living, you've seen examples in your own life and in movies and on TV and everywhere else of what something looks like and how it feels when it looks that way. So for instance, TV and movies, and especially kind of noir films, but if you look at The Sopranos, if you look at The Wire, if you look at like a lot of great TV, the lighting is really excellent. Like they must have spent, a lot of time thinking about setting the mood, because it's essentially theater, and theater is essentially like a controlled space where you can set up the lighting and set up a bunch of scenery, and then have a bunch of people play in it, right? And film and TV are the same, and to some degree photography is the same, right? And when you're in a theater and you have lights and you have scenery, the lights are of a particular color, of a particular style. Maybe there's a vignette, maybe there's a fall off. And all of those things tell the audience how to feel. On TV, maybe there's some blue light or some orange light coming through a window, and if it's blue, it tells you that it's night. If it's orange, it tells you that it's the morning. Do you know what I mean? And so, and depending on how that falls across somebody's face, it completely changes the meaning. And so that's something to be very aware of as you go out and photograph, whether a situation or a person. The lighting completely changes how you might feel about them. If you light from below, it might turn them into a spooky Dracula type person. If you light them from straight on, you might make a metaphor that suggests kind of like old style, like newspaper, either film or photography. If you do a kind of really diffuse light in a certain circumstance, it might look like an ad. And even that you think it might look like an ad just shows how influenced by the methods of capitalism we've been in our understanding of how everything is supposed to look, right? And let me see if, so these are pictures from a town in western Pennsylvania called Braddock, which has a big active steel mill and is also an area just outside of Pittsburgh that has had a like majority African American population right next to the mill, and so it's another example of environmental racism, with an enormous proportion of people living under the poverty line in conditions that are poor air conditions, and in close proximity to horrible chemicals involved in making industry. But I wanted to show you these pictures as another example of how to make pictures of a place that feel like the place, as opposed to making pictures of a person that tell you how to feel about the person and tell you what's going on in relation to the person, and the photographer in relation to the person. Does anybody have any questions? I feel like I've been rambling forever for 44 minutes. Oh, we're back at Flagville. Okay.
Anybody, feel free to jump in. I do have a few questions, but I will keep mine.
Sure thing. For
the end. All right, I think I will interject here a little bit. Okay, there's a lot to unpack, and it's really wonderful to see you kind of be able to document a really messed up moment in history, or very confusing, because it's.
Yeah, I'm just very confused by it. I think that's the ultimate kind of way of describing what's going on for me, is I'm very confused. In a lot of ways, I'm not confused at all. It makes perfect sense. But in other ways, I'm very confused, in part because I think in order to, and this goes back, I think, to the Rambo kind of suggestion. I think that on a certain level, in order to deal with this moment, you have to be pretty macho. And if you want to present it in a certain way, or if you want to deal with it in a way that's unaffected. And I'm the first to admit that I'm in no way macho. And so instead of approaching it and whacking everything with a hammer and saying, this is what it is, I'm getting whacked with the hammer and it's telling me what it is, and I'm saying, whoa, this is how I feel about it. You know what I mean? And I think that that's not necessarily news, but that might be more on the edge of making some art sometimes, to get whacked by the hammer.
So I guess to dive deeper into that subject, you're asked to go to these very different places in Middle America. You also, assuming, take pictures in a more familiar place. Every time that you go somewhere, it might, you have the benefit of being a stranger, right? Of dressing different. I've met you and you dress a very particular way. How does being an outsider, what do you have to do to kind of step outside of yourself and take a picture?
Well, to be honest, right now, I'm very, wary of the general public. I'm very, very wary of the general public, not only because of the pandemic, but because of politics. because of the just everything that I've been witnessing recently. I was driving through Chicago last week, or earlier this week, I don't even remember now, and on an overpass during Chicago 5 o'clock rush hour traffic, there was a woman. Ooh, I'm backlit. I love it. There was a woman up on the overpass going like yelling and screaming from the overpass. And in giant words on the overpass, it said, "You can't stop what's coming. Q." Baffling. And that's obvious. That's a reference to QAnon, right? But somebody's up there preaching the operatic future that we can't stop. Q. I'm baffled by this. But at the same time, it makes total sense that people need an explanation for the absurd, and the absurd abounds everywhere. Also, on the way out here, I saw more of these like Rambo flags and Second Amendment flags and so forth, as well as seeing all available at what were called Trump shops, which were like basically tractor trailers with a big Trump Pence flag and the opportunity for commerce. And then along the road at one point I saw a Trump train made out of hay bale along the side of the highway. And what an incredible, bizarre vision of spectacle for the sake of spectacle, for the sake of attention. You know what I mean? I think that's.
Would you say, however,
I think that's just built into what's going on at this point in our country, is that the things that are loudest, the things that are brightest, the things that are shiniest, the things that are most spectacular get attention. And if we continue to give them attention, take it. and that's like the ultimate world will swirl, and we're all going to go down the toilet because of it. Because if it can get your attention, we'll take it. And if you can change the storyline, then you own it. It's ridiculous. It's like completely divorced from a way of approaching things at any other time prior to, like, within the last 100 years. Like, here I am in Montana, and I can look out the window. And yesterday I was taking breaks from reading Society of the Spectacle to look out the window, and I was just observing cows grazing and moving to a water source and back from the water source. And at some point, for somebody, say 80 years old, that would have been an experience of the flow of time. If a certain set of principles was in order for that to be their experience of time. Time is based on the sun rising, on the sun setting, on taking the animals in and out of the barn, of making sure the animals are fed and so forth. And now things could not be further from that. And I'm not saying that that's good or bad, but what I'm saying is, like, we have a completely different set of principles of what's good. We have a completely different set of principles of how things fit together, of how we relate to each other, of how we relate to the earth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of that is implied on you by your experience of growing up, and whatever you've seen and whatever you've read and how you've been talked to by people. And at a certain point, you have to break away from all of that and figure out how you actually feel about things as an individual, as opposed to how you've been told to feel about things. And when you can do that, then you start to be able to decode what's actually going on. And so if you can take some time to be with yourself and figure out what's going on, what you care about, then you'll find that when you go back into society, you'll feel like you have X-ray vision, and that you're able to kind of see a little bit detached and maybe floating above what seems to be going on. And if you can do that, then you can make a great picture that can help bring together and describe all these sets of impossible circumstances that we live with now, but give some sense of how it all fits together in a way that can be shared with somebody else in the future, and that's a picture. Yeah. So I think it's essential to kind of be able to step back and get out of, essentially get out of your head. And some of that might require therapy if you're upset with yourself about any number of things, or with your past or with your future. Some of that might require some meditation. Some of that might require a whole bunch of reading. But right now you're in school. And so what you have to do is just fill your brain with as much good stuff as possible. And I'm sorry that I've filled your brain with 53 minutes of ranting. But I recommend reading poetry. I recommend checking out the Tao Te Ching. I recommend checking out reading a bunch of James Baldwin. He was right 60 years ago, and he's still right now, because nothing has changed. Even though many, many things have changed, it's just more, it's more underhanded and covert now, the kinds of indecency, or it's right out in the open. And if you do something right out in the open, how can it be wrong? There's no sleight of hand.
I have one question, maybe if anybody has any other comments. Part of this week's lecture had to do with responsibility and the responsibility of the citizen. And one of the examples that I gave was the Greek hoplite, which happens to be farmers were the soldiers of the time.
Okay.
And I feel like there is merit. There's being in an objectively violent situation kind of makes you aware of sort of the reality of life. And so I think there is something to say about these, on both sides perhaps, from these Rambo Trump supporters, or I was in California and experienced some rioting there from Black Lives Matter. And I think as a photographer, you sometimes almost, taking a photo is somewhat of a violent act. You're putting yourself in a situation that you don't belong, and then you shoot. But literally, the word is you shoot. Is there any advice
right
you can give students to kind of get the courage to put themselves in a situation, or it's easy for you with all the experience that you have, but sort of
I'll tell you what, I don't like being in the middle of conflict. I don't like being the object of somebody's ire. For instance, I made some work on the street in New York one time for some years. Let me see if I can pull it up. See if I can pull this up. And here we go. Where'd it go? Am I sharing a folder?
I love the name of the folder.
Okay, I can't see it. That's the only problem. Where the fuck? Oh, here we are. Here we are. Okay, insomnia. Okay, so I would make all this work walking around Greenwich Village in New York City. And I was essentially at the time very depressed and mad as hell, and an undergrad about your age, 19 or 20 years old. And this was during the Obama era. And he was the first president I'd voted for and campaigned for. And we were 2 years into his presidency, and yet we were still at war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I lived in this little apartment up on the top floor of a former tenement, and I would come downstairs and walk out the door and step over a sleeping homeless person in order to leave my house to walk up the street and around the corner to Bleecker Street, which is essentially a street filled with bars. And there would be all these people partying outside the bars and in the bars. And so here I was, not old enough to drink yet, not able to sleep, mad as hell at the world. And I would walk out of my apartment, step over a sleeping dead body, and walk up the street and watch people partying during a recession. And I thought I was crazy, and I was crazy. But the way that I dealt with it was by going out and making pictures of what it felt like for me going through that scene. And I was kind of tripping on it. And amidst making all this work, one day, I've always liked this picture. One day, I was out making work, and somebody came up to me on the street. I hadn't even photographed them. They came up to me on the street and bit my cheek. They took a bite out of my cheek on the street while I was on Bleecker Street in New York. And I had done nothing to provoke that. And this guy was just nuts. You know, he didn't like that I was in his proximity taking pictures with a flash. I had nothing to do with him. But he came up and bit my cheek, and I told him to get the fuck away from me and leave me the fuck alone, and I'll call the fucking police. Because I was basically being assaulted for being out, seeing what it was like to be a person in New York at that moment. And honestly, that was like one of them. I've always liked this one too. That was like one of the moments that made me feel a lot less confident to go out and deal with the general public without having a really good reason to deal with the general public. And so ever since then, I've really liked to be invited to a circumstance. If I'm going to photograph it, I like to have some kind of assignment. But nonetheless, I'm still floating around and trying to see how I feel about everything. And essentially, I feel completely insecure about everything all the time and myself in relation to it. And so maybe some of that is expressed in the pictures in a certain way too. And I think that's what I mean by my approach to photography versus a more macho approach. A more macho approach imposes on the situation a feeling about it. My approach allows the situation to impose on me a feeling. And then I'm in response to that as opposed to telling it how I feel. Obviously, I'm making pictures that show how it feels to be there and how I feel about things. But it's out of a deep curiosity rather than out of a telling you how it is. And so I was thinking about that earlier, and I thought that I was thinking about this, and maybe we can talk about it or maybe not, that circumspection is the difference between art with a message versus propaganda. And what I mean by that is circumspection, I mean being curious, not totally knowing, not being certain, asking questions, being kind of interrogative of a situation rather than accepting it or rather than just blasting out meaning in billboard headline style, which I think is kind of to accept what is versus to constantly question yourself in relation to what appears to be. So I think part of the whole thing is to embrace mystery and chance and to embrace not knowing. And you may never know. And I certainly don't know.
It's a wonderful answer, John.
Thanks.
We have maybe time for just one student question. Anybody curious about Jonno and his process? We'll let him go after this.
I have
They're
a
very shy kids. There we go.
It's not about your process, but do you still work for anyone? Like, do you have any current assignments, or you're just?
I'm all freelance.
Oh,
And so for a while I had a budding career, and then occasionally I still do. It depends on the week, it depends on the month. Honestly, the whole pandemic really put a damper on things, but I'm working on trying to come out of it stronger. Actually, my second quarter I made less money than I made when I was like 16, but third quarter is coming together a little bit better. But it's okay. It's all a flow. It's all a flow, and I recognize how lucky I am and how much privilege I have to be able to weather this with so much continuity. And that's been one of my goals throughout this entire experience, is to maintain some kind of continuity for myself from what I knew to be in the past. And I remember there was a very strange moment back in March, where I was sitting in my car, sitting in a place where I'd parked my car many times before, and realizing that although nothing was changing, nothing would be, at least for a while, as it had been in my totality of experience for a long time previously. And just recognizing that nothing had ostensibly seemingly changed in my present, and yet outside of my present, things were and would be very different for at least several months, was a really striking thing. And I'm still trying to figure out exactly what all of this means, and why it's so cruel the way everything has been executed. I think that's the thing that bothers me so much, is this all could have been an amazing opportunity to reshape things under the guiding principle of kindness and justice, and instead we've gone the exact opposite direction, at least for the moment. So Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy New Year.
Jonno, we thank you very, very much for your time.
Happy birthday, Javi.
Thank you. Yes.
Peace. Good luck, everybody. Feel free to write me anytime.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
If I can help
Good
anyone.
luck.
All right. Thank you.
Good luck in Montana.
Thank you.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.